Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus' church and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, I am so excited to have Joe Wells joining me on today's episode. Joe is the president and co-founder of Kayo Publications and co-host of the podcast, The Hey Joe Show. You do that with your wife, right?
I do. She's on most of the episodes, yes.
I thought I read that Kayo, that's Greek, right? For
it is.
Fire, maybe?
It is, yeah. We came up with that when I was working with a magazine I used to be an editor of, and we had to change the name. And it's hard to name a magazine in a Christian genre without stepping on other people's feet. And so we went to the Greek language. Kaio, it's that idea of being on fire from the inside out, burning from the inside out.
Love it. You are the author of several books, including the one that we're going to focus on today, Connected, Parenting Faithfully in the Digital Age. So excited to talk to you about that. You have a BS degree in as a Bachelor of Science degree.
Yes.
You also have a Master's of Ministry from Freed-Hardeman University. You serve as a special recruiter for the College of Biblical Studies at Freed-Hardeman University, and you spend a lot of your time, I've noticed, looking at your schedule, man. You're a busy guy, traveling around, doing a lot of conferences and frequent guest speaker for youth rallies and family events and men's days and men retreats and lectureships and gospel meetings. I was looking at it like, man, when does this guy ever get to go home? So
sometimes not as much as I would like to, but fortunately my family's able to travel with us as well.
Awesome. And you're here traveling today with us in Chattanooga. You're actually one of our speakers for our summer series, Awaken Chattanooga. And man, our lineup is just stellar. And you as a testament to you as a speaker and an author are on this lineup for a reason, because we've got a stellar lineup of speakers. So we're extremely excited to have you. You and your wife, you said you've been married coming up on 24 years in October. You've got
That's correct.
4 kids, 2 that are about ready to launch, and the other 2 you said are still
in the teen years.
Still in the teen years, so you got your hands full. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be able to be one of your speakers at this series. So thank y'all so much. I mean that. Thank you.
Yeah, I like I said, for those that have looked at the lineup, they're like, how in the world did this little church get these guys to come speak? So it's pretty cool to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's amazing what an invitation and an open night can do. So
yeah, you never know until you ask.
Until
right?
you ask.
Yeah.
That's right.
So you are currently. You tell the audience a little bit about your past. What, like, preaching and ministry, youth minister?
Yeah, so I've been all of those. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to go into preaching initially. I grew up a preacher's kid, and so my thought was that I'll do something else, and always was going to be active in the church, but didn't necessarily see myself as that guy, which is where the Bachelor's of Science comes into play. I thought going to orthopedic medicine. Okay. Is what I thought I wanted. Always sports was a big deal. I'm a big guy. Sports was always a big part of our life.
Yeah.
However, when I graduated college, I went to Middle Tennessee State, and I never went into the field of study that I actually got a degree in. And that's when I was called in to be a youth intern with a congregation in Brentwood, Tennessee. And so I started my youth ministry days, I guess about 25 years ago, in the year 2000, I guess. And from there went on to desire to preach. And so I went to the Nashville School of Preaching and Biblical Studies there in Nashville. It's a night school. And so after that, I went into preaching. And between preaching and associate ministry and youth ministry, education ministry, I feel like I've done a little bit of everything at the local level. But I was blessed also to be introduced to seminar work. Where you travel around to various congregations, you develop a seminar, or you write on a particular subject, and you become kind of known as that guy. This is where he's put his research into. And so I did that for a while. That's when I recorded some DVDs, back when people used DVDs and CDs. And then, of course, went back into the pulpit for a bit, but then in 2019, jumped into what we're currently doing with Kayo Publications. which is traveling the country, have the opportunity almost every weekend to be at a different location. So I have a broad perspective of the brotherhood in the sense of we are blessed to travel so much, and I look at that as a positive in the sense that my children know that the church is bigger than just the local congregation.
Yeah.
The struggle with that is understanding the value in their lives of the local congregation.
Right.
That you don't get so plugged in outside that you're not plugged in locally.
Yeah.
And Erin and I try to do a good job of that. You know, she is a wonderful helper. And like you said, man, through the course of raising kids, we're still in the midst of raising children, but God has opened some amazing doors of opportunity for us. And one of those is writing this book, and one of those is being able to talk to you tonight. So.
Yeah. My brain was going in a lot of different places as you're talking about, you know, just the brotherhood at large. I noticed, I grew up a preacher's kid, and, you know, Dad spoke at different places, and grew up in Gambia, West Africa as missionaries, and you know, got to travel, and as a campus minister myself, taking college groups to different, you know, places around, you know, the country, and even, you know, into South America. You have that commonality in the church where you don't realize a lot of times, like when we go into the same church every Sunday, that there's so many other people doing the exact same thing, worshiping our Lord and Savior. And it's just cool to have that kind of perspective on, it's not just us, it's you know, a lot of other people doing this thing.
And that's important to me, that my children know that. I mean, I guess in my mind, I did know that. It's assuring, because sometimes you hear gloom and doom at various local works, and it doesn't mean that local work believes it's gloom and doom, but sometimes there's this kind of news, whether it's fabricated or accurate, of, you know, there's not a lot of good, faithful people, especially out west and up north. And, you know, the reality is a lot of people who say those things, they have not been out there.
Right.
And I tell people regularly, you know, there are still people who are faithful in California, who are striving to be who God wants them to be, and up in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And, you know, so my children get to see that. You know, the running joke is that I like to stretch our gas tank almost to where it's on empty. And Erin has asked me before, what are you going to do when the van runs out of gas? I said, we're going to call the church. You know, and I mean that in the sense, they said, well, how do you know? I said, there's somebody nearby in the church. You know, we've been out places that you had to drive an hour or more before you got from one gas station to the next.
It's, you know, funny, that reminds me, my kids were little, and my wife was taking them down to Gulf Shores, Alabama on vacation. I can't remember, I couldn't go for some reason, but they're on I-65, and the car breaks down, and she calls me, and she's like, hey, we're halfway to Gulf Shores. I'm on the side of the I-65, broke down, and it's like 6, 7 p.m. at night, and my mom and dad are already in Gulf Shores, so they're going down there to meet them, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I mean, my kids are little, you're on the side of the interstate, and I'm like, well, where are you exactly? She had no idea. She's like, there's a billboard sign in front of me, and it says, I can't remember what it was, but she says something. So I start doing my, you know, sleuth research, trying to find out, and I kind of pinpoint their location. And I call my dad, and he's like, I'm on my way, but it's going to take him, you know, a good 4, 5, 6 hours to get there. I called a church that I think is in that location, the office number. Now, it's after hours. For whatever reason, this little small church, this is a Church of Christ, gets forwarded to the secretary's home number. She answers the phone. Within 30 minutes, they have their elders.
I love it, man.
They're out there sitting with them. They made sure that they got off the interstate to a Walmart parking lot, sat with them, stayed with them until help arrived. And that was just the coolest thing.
Yeah, that's what, you know, people who are part of the body of Christ, I think that we intellectually understand that we're connected, but it's in those moments where you're out of gas on the side of the road in the middle of you don't know where, that you can call up people you've never met, and because of the blood of Jesus, they show up. Yeah. And we've seen that happen before, and here's why it's so important when you talk about our travels, and even in your family, you would attest this, we want our children to understand the value of the church. Absolutely. We want them to understand that they're not always going to be where we are. Yeah. And so when they leave, they need to become a vital part of that congregation,
Right,
to be
right.
an active participant
Exactly.
in that congregation. And so that's one of the neat things that my children get exposed to, and seeing so many different congregations throughout America.
Love it. Love
It's pretty cool.
it. Man, let's talk about your book.
Yeah.
Connected, Parenting Faithfully in the Digital Age. Man, this is near and dear to my heart because I'm so invested in the stuff that is in your book and what you talk about. So first of all, was there like a specific moment or experience that you had that you decided, you know what, I need to write about the digital stuff, the screens, and how it's impacting families and kids?
A lot of that stems from research that I had done over the years.
Okay.
In the sense of trying to watch culture. I have been watching culture since about 2008,
Right.
when I became what was called the director of youth, family, and culture for that particular company. And I saw a great disconnect between what we were teaching on Sunday mornings and how people were living every other day of the week. And so that was back before technology was really accepted. Of course, the internet was there, but usually you were locked to a computer.
Right.
The smartphones didn't come out. The iPhone came out about 2007.
Right.
The iPad didn't come out until about 2010. So we were really early in that. But what I saw was there was a lot of competition for the young person's attention, specifically teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And so as time progressed, I would continue to research the impact that technology was having, and the intentionality behind technology. In other words, the people who were coming up with the content, they weren't just entertaining. And anybody who understands business, they understand marketing, you understand that a listener is a potential dollar bill.
Yep.
Because there's advertisements that are interjected into radio, into even apps today.
Yeah.
All of that is about how can we sway your behavior.
Right.
And so that had been around a while. You know, MTV had a concept regarding that as well. They weren't just about music and music videos. And believe it or not, the parent company Viacom wasn't just about that. They were about keeping you and hooking you from the cradle to the grave.
Yeah.
Well, as technology continued to be introduced, my research led me down a path of, in the Lord's church, we better be ahead of this. We've got to talk about this. And a lot of times, older generations who are called digital migrants, right? Immigrants.
Yeah.
They weren't raised with everyday technology or technology being part of every day.
Right.
I remember the Apple green screen computer. I remember the first time that we got to see a color screen computer. I remember in our computer classes printing off paper, things that we had done on paper that was connected by dots on the corners, right?
Yeah.
And so my first cell phone was one that you had to pull the antenna up, and you didn't use it because it cost so much money, right?
Yeah.
So we came from a generation that this wasn't a regular, everyday part of life like it is today. We had TV, we had video games, right? We had that stuff. But it is totally different today. And in my research, what I found was there were emotional issues tied to this. There's behavioral issues tied to this. There's self-esteem issues tied to this, on top of the addictive aspect, and now even the predatory nature of what's out there and what could happen and what has happened.
Right.
And so all of my research led me to conclude we've got to talk about it more. The problem is, you asked what was the kind of the tipping point. I didn't see a lot written by members of the church. There was a lot out there that were from social scientists or from a denominational approach. And that's where I went. And they said some good things. I need to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
They opened my eyes. And even today in my research of this, I read individuals who come, even at times, from atheist or agnostic backgrounds. However, they bring great information to the table on this. The one book I'm thinking of is The Anxious Generation. But when I didn't see much from the Lord's church, I said, we can do this. And with the research that I'd done, the background that I had, I guess, developed, I said, it's time to write it.
Yep.
But write it from a perspective of not just dealing with technology, but dealing with technology in as much as we want to raise children who have hearts that seek Jesus.
Yeah. There seems to be a, what's the word I'm looking for? Insidious, kind of a intentional design that does not have our kids' best interest at heart, because you talk about some of the addictive, the dopamine releases, especially with the apps that have been developed, the tracking of, algorithms to, they know what turns you on, they know what you like, and there is kind of a collective from parents our age, specifically within the church, kind of just a naivety about what's actually behind the scenes. Like there's kind of a dark force that's driving a lot of this stuff, and we don't realize. I mean, to my point, Steve Jobs himself, the inventor, he would not allow this stuff in his own home.
Yep.
And this is going back, over a decade ago, before, when this was coming out. That should say something right there, that the inventor of the majority of the stuff that we're using today was terrified of it to have his own kids.
I totally agree. And we know more today than he knew then.
Yeah.
Well, we understand even something that I know many of your viewers will understand is the blue light from screen. We're not even talking about, is it immoral content? Mm-hmm. We're talking about the blue light from screen and its impact on the brain.
Yeah.
We know more today, not just are they looking at things of an immoral nature, pornography or things like that. We understand that the human brain is interacting with technology, and there are chemical responses that are happening. There are behaviors that are forming and social norms that we're having to deal with today, i.e. higher levels of anxiety, more depression, that really can be traced back to the amount of technology and the way it's used in our lives.
Yeah. There's a graph that in my own research as a former campus minister had pulled up, and looking at the graph and the rates of depression and anxiety and suicide among teens, and I break it down by male and female, you see the spike level going up at the introduction of certain technologies being introduced, such as the iPhone, such as Instagram, such as Snapchat. So it mirrors the technology and the culture, what culture is, the impact that culture is having on our youth's brain and the way we interact with the world. So. Yeah.
And that's part of what you said. There's more to it than just entertainment, right?
Absolutely.
So if you and I know that from the research that we've done, do you think people who have millions of dollars tied up in products and product sales, that they don't understand that? They don't understand how we can best influence a young consumer.
Right.
They do. They absolutely do. Yeah. And so, there's more to it. It's not just entertainment. Every listener represents a dollar bill.
Yeah.
And as long as we embrace that, when we come to understand that, we're going to be better equipped in approaching this.
Yep. So along these lines, then, what are some of the biggest spiritual dangers that our kids are facing today because of the constant digital connectivity?
Oh, man. One of the things that I have seen and observed on top of, now the easy ones, right? The low-hanging fruit are things like addiction or things like sexting, things like pornography, right? That's the low-hanging fruit that anybody who has asked that question would say, well, those have got to be the ones, right? Anything of an immoral nature, listening more readily, being able to listen to music on Spotify that's explicit, that maybe parents won't know about, who aren't engaged, right, with their kids, watching videos on YouTube, not even talking about Netflix or any of the other streaming services of content that's inappropriate. We might not, in our world today, categorize that as pornography, but it is. It's just socially accepted pornography, right?
Yep.
The biggest struggles that I'm seeing are kids tying their self-worth and self-esteem to what happens on technology instead of tying that to God. Right? I'm valuable because I'm made in the image of God versus I'm valuable because I got so many reactions to my social media post. That's one of the big ones that I'm seeing. Number two, though, is it's almost like, as much as we don't want to admit it, the attention span has decreased considerably. Right? And so now in the Lord's church, as I interact with a lot of people, as you do, I'm sure as well, we're talking about preaching to the attention span, teaching Bible classes to the attention span. And not just are they able to pay attention, but now we're talking about it from the standpoint of, hey, you got to break it up because they're used to viewing things in segments in a way that maybe in the past we would watch TV shows, but we were still used to sitting and listening to a Bible class and participating or a sermon or things like that. But it's even played into education. adaptation, the adopting of technology more and more into the education realm has even then amplified that expectation amongst young people that if I am trying to relay something to you, I'm better off to relay it online or through a short, 60-second video clip than I would be to try to have a 15 to 20 minute interaction with you. And point in case with that, on the drive in, I listen to news. I try to stay up on what's going on. Recently in New York City, they had a Democratic primary for the Democratic candidate.
Yep.
And the man who won was not the man who had the reputation and the well-known name and a bridge named after him, who used to be the governor.
Yep.
It was the individual who utilized TikTok in a way that the other candidate did not use.
Yep.
And, of course, you understand TikTok is short clippets. As a matter of fact, a lot of the voters who voted for him is coming out. They got a lot of their information from TikTok. Yeah. Short 60-second clips, short 30-second clips, right? And you'd look at that and you'd go, oh, that's not a big deal. That's just a certain... No, it is a big deal because it impacts how we go about reaching people, right? But it also impacts young people's ability to tune in and to pay attention without some sort of external stimuli.
Yeah.
Now, I would argue that that's not necessarily uncommon and only specific to this generation. Even before we started using PowerPoint, people used sheet sermons. Yeah. And they did that because a visual is another way to connect the auditory, right? If you can tie the auditory and the visual together, it's such a stronger connection to the memory, right?
Yeah.
But nowadays, video, and I had a conversation over one of our podcast episodes with a sex therapist. He was a trauma therapist who dealt with sexual addiction stuff. And he talked about the impact of pornography of days old, where you would go into a grocery store or go into a convenience store and buy a magazine, right, versus the impact that the digital content has on the human brain. Yeah. The still image versus the moving image.
Right.
And he said the moving image, we're learning today that video has such a more strong impact on the human brain than even a still image does.
Yeah.
So all of that to say this, number one, I would just lay those two out. Self-esteem, self-worth being tied to what happens on social media versus to God. Number two, attention.
So, man, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I think as you're talking, I'm thinking about, man, do we want to get into the chemical stuff on here? Because this is, a lot of parents don't understand. They're like, this is a very chemically dependent, chemically inducive, we're talking about brain chemistry here, the release of dopamines. And I don't think that a lot of parents or listeners have, well, maybe some, maybe they do. I shouldn't say that. But understanding just how powerful that is. You reference in your book, I think, a section there talking about Pavlov's dog. It's very similar to, this response conditioning type of characteristic, where when you have something released in your brain, a feel-good chemical, that reinforces that whatever it is that released that behavior, then you for an adult even, it's thinking about, okay, what are the consequences? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to go back to that, whatever it was that produced what made you feel good. I mean, it makes sense. You think about a young person whose brain, their prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed until they're 25 or so. That's what the most recent research says. And they're accessing this stuff, and they don't have the skill sets or the tools maybe to resist that dopamine surge and understand, wow, there's consequences to this, and I'm conditioning myself for something that is going to be really problematic down the road. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about consequences. They're just, doing whatever feels good. And the problem with all of this, because people are going to push back automatically and say, but technology is good. It's how we teach now. It's how we train. There's good stuff. But there's this other part of this that we need to look at and understand. There is a de-evolution now that is being created through technology, where we have opened up a Pandora's box, so to speak, where when we're accessing the information and it's so readily available, it's so ubiquitous, I was talking a little bit earlier to you just about, campus ministry and interviewing college students, and I didn't interview one. And I may have said this on the show before. I did not interview one, and I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of college students that had not been exposed to pornography. Not one. And I, part of those interviews were, when was the first time that you were exposed? And some of this was not, they were seeking it out. It was just, a friend says, hey man, look at this. Or accidentally seeing it or trying to, look something up and something pops up on your screen that's not supposed to pop up. But the average age of exposure, at the time that I was doing this was, I think, around 12 years old. And we're like, what? 12 years old. And now I'm reading some research that says that's even like around 9 years old. So it's so ubiquitous. It's out there. The spiritual implications, the long-term implications of addictions, not just sexual addictions, but, all the other stuff that goes with it. The hammer on the self-esteem. Talk a little bit about how you address those things in your book.
Yeah, well, of course, I hate to say I don't remember every detail, but this is what I would genuinely say to that, right? The self-esteem is like, you got to understand, teenagers especially are on a journey to discover who they are, right? And so they're going to try different identifiers. I don't know how better to say that. Les Parrott, who is a child adolescent psychologist, he would list things like birth order would be one of those, right? So if they're the oldest kid in the family, then they might try to adhere to what's expected of the oldest kid in the family. But if they're the baby, then they're going to try to maybe assume that role, right? Almost like role expectations.
Right.
But it's not just that. Sometimes it's found in accomplishments. Like, was I the captain of the football team? Did I letter? Therefore, when I wear my jacket, I feel like I'm something, right? Or was it that I was the valedictorian, and therefore my grades impact who I am? It goes all the way down to behaviors that are seen as grown up. That could include premarital sex. It could include the way they talk, the way maybe smoking. Today, vaping, might be a part of that. Various things that Les Parrott brought out. But what he did bring out was there's a journey that they're on to discover who they are. That's why this season of life, they may have colored hair. Next season of life, they don't. That's why I tell parents it's probably not wise to make a big deal about everything that they're doing. Now, if it's harmful or immoral, if it's against the will of God, then yes. But a little, what do they call that? A streak of hair, mermaid, color in their hair. That's not going to break the world. Now, I do draw the line, and this is just me. I think skinny jeans should be outlawed just because, my joke is if you're going to wear them, I'm going to wear them, and we're going to have trouble then, But the idea is kids love being in a group. They don't want to be on their own, right? That's one of the greatest fears of young people is being on an island or being left out. And so oftentimes, as they are on this journey for self-esteem, self-worth, what they'll do is they'll look in the mirror of expectation. What does this group expect me to do to be in order to be included? And oftentimes that's not spoken things. There's not like a list that they go by, right? It's things that they observe. Well, this is what I observed from the kids who are included in the group. They all dress this way. They all talk this way. Maybe they have these interests. Maybe they drive a certain vehicle. They have a certain type of technology or whatever it is. And the reason that's so significant is because there is that hunger that sometimes overrides what you and I would call logic, right? And I've heard it described this way, and it makes sense to me that if you divide your human brain into three brains, this is the way it was said. You have your logic brain, your emotional brain, and then your behavior brain. And it goes from the front to the back, right? So your emotional brain is connected closely to your behavioral brain. And the goal is to get the logic brain to be strong enough that it bypasses or at least deals with the emotion so that the behavior comes out in a logical form. The problem is, as you've already said, the young person's brain, they're saying now the prefrontal cortex is not developed until around the age of 25. Now, that creates a dilemma. And, of course, that's not been the way it always. Here's what's weird, brother. We know that today, but yet in my research, you can go back. George Washington was a surveyor for the Commonwealth of Virginia in his teen years. By the time he was like 19 or 20, he was a foreman building a courthouse. So the expectations that we have culturally for our kids, I think, has diminished over time to where we got happy if they brushed their teeth and cleaned their room, versus the cultural expectations of generations gone by was much higher, I think, for young people.
Yeah.
However, the journey for self-esteem, that there's more emotional thinking because that logic brain is not there to go, man, I don't need that. That I'm not somebody because they say I'm somebody. I'm not somebody because they liked my post or they shared my post or anything. I'm somebody because I'm rooted in God. I was created in his image.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if that's not being intentionally driven home to that kid, then through their adolescent development, they're already going to struggle anyway. They need to have something to come back to, like an anchor to come back to, where mom is displaying that, dad's displaying that, the church is displaying that. And so oftentimes what happens in their search for their identity, their self-worth, they try on a lot of different things.
Yep.
Sometimes that leads them down the road of depression. Sometimes it leads them down the road of FOMO, fear of missing out, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes it leads them down the road of behavior that initially looks like rebellion. But the reality is what they're doing is screaming for belonging. And all of that plays into where they spend the most time.
Yeah.
Right. So if technology has become such an integral part of their life, then it makes sense that that's where they're going to find that identity more.
Yeah. And the concept of wanting to fit in, that's not a new thing. And you mentioned, from a cultural expectation standpoint, and I'm thinking back, your Alexander Hamiltons, your George Washington. I mean, these guys were, the founding fathers, these were all young men, and in some cases still teenagers. They did not have the distractions of a culture like we have in the 21st century. And I wonder how much of that is laxivity of parental, kind of a hands-off, permissive approach, just because, I understand, looking back when my kids were younger, and we made some decisions that made life for my kids extremely difficult. It put them in a position where they were kind of on the outside of their cultural norms. You talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out. They missed out. And so we had to be very intentional about when we were going to allow technology to be accessed by them. And then when we did, it was a battle. And we lost a lot of those battles because we were fighting against something that we didn't understand just how powerful it was. So from a cultural standpoint, we're talking about a beast that is so large, that is so pervasive. You're carrying the world in your back pocket. And I can't remember the author. She wrote a book. She was in a huge social influencer, millions of followers. Her husband worked in Silicon Valley. He developed the algorithms that track people's behavior online, and they saw the risks associated with that, and so they pulled away. They completely got rid of all technology. And she was doing a conference, and somebody asked her, they said, when should I give my daughter a cell phone? And she said, when you are ready for her to see pornography. That was her response.
Wow.
And so that's kind of what we're talking about. So, we're dealing with, we called it peer pressure back in my day, and peer pressure is still a thing. But I want you to speak a little bit about how that looks so different today, like the consequences of peer pressure with technology, what we're dealing with there.
Yeah, and oftentimes it shows in ways that you don't escape. I hate to say it that way. Peer pressure, when we were growing up, it was there, and a lot of times, I say a lot of times, I don't know, that sometimes we use words that are too generic. People caved to that in the moment, but that moment passed by.
Yeah.
Like a river that continues to flow, right? Now, obviously, the Bible speaks about the value of a good name.
Yeah.
And so reputation could be marred in the past, even without technology, right?
Yep.
The problem, though, today is when you start talking about peer pressure, and behaviors that people respond to because they're desiring that acceptance, those times never leave.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they come back to bite you later as as you age, or in memes that are shared, or in spreading things around campus, not that are, hey, did you hear what Joe Wells did? But in ways of, oh, I'm going to just send this out all over everybody's phone, and it's going to ding, and here it comes, right? And so the peer pressure concept, number one, is the difference today is it doesn't leave like it did before, right? And I got to be careful how I say that, because we have memories, but it's not the same as showing you a picture of, hey, this is what we did at the party.
Keeps resurfacing over and over again.
Right, which also then plays into something that I know a lot of young people, they're starting to become more aware of this, but it wasn't many years ago they weren't, and I think it does need to still be, kind of put out there of what you share, what images you share, what words you share. All of that is that it can play into your digital reputation.
Yeah, digital footprints.
Correct. And so when you start talking about a girl who hungers for the attention of a guy, but the guy has expectations that there'll be some photos that will be sent to him to show how serious she is about the relationship, she may not want to do that, but she may not want to lose the relationship more.
Right.
So she sends compromising pictures. All of a sudden, now when those pictures get sent around because that breakup's going to happen eventually, or that guy's going to hold on to those pictures, then that girl, due to the peer pressure of this is just the expectation today in relationships, is going to haunt her. And so some of that plays into this, but the peer pressure concept, in my estimation, as I've researched that, it really comes down to not that peer pressure is new, but the peer pressure is unspoken. It's this is what is modern. This is what we do today. And that could be anything from, hey, the current trend in Reels, right? The current trend on posting. And therefore, if I want to be current, then I need to get out there and post that. Well, what if that's not something that I should post? What if it's a song that I shouldn't maybe put on my reel?
Right.
Well, that's secondary, Dad. Nobody thinks about that. And as a matter of fact, nobody's combing that closely. And we forget that at times that even in technology, we're to be the light that God has called us to be, not just the trend that people will watch and go, oh, yeah, we saw you did that dance, or we saw you play that song, right? So that stuff never escapes. And even as a college recruiter, I can tell you, and part of the seminar that I do in this book that I deliver based on the book is bosses are looking at that. College recruiters are looking at that. And quite honestly, the digital footprint that we leave behind due to peer pressure or whatever, it has consequences far beyond our high school years.
Absolutely. So you said that before I became a campus minister, I was in a position to hire people, and I would tell my HR staff that I said, hey, I want you to do some stalking, and there were quite a few people that never even got their foot in the door to sit before me so I could interview them and offer them a good job because of their digital footprint. So, I mean, that what you're saying is I've actually been in that position where I have not hired a person simply because of what they had put out there in the digital world.
Yeah, and maybe that's because of peer pressure as well. I think sometimes if we say, well, kids today are pressured in ways that they weren't, maybe, but pressure's pressure.
Right.
I think that the landscape has opened up ways to demonstrate that pressure, right? And what I'm seeing is the consequence that oftentimes teenagers don't think about because they're thinking, and this is true to adolescent development, most young people are thinking short term.
Yeah, sure.
And they have to grow into long-term thinking. And unfortunately, I've heard said before, and I've even said it before, man, I'm so glad that social media wasn't around when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Because if I had to live the rest of my life looking over the shoulder, and I would like to say I was a pretty good kid, but I'm sure there were still some things that I did that were dumb, that if there were a picture of that, people would say, I can't believe Joe Wells did that, right? And that's part of the issue is this doesn't escape these kids. No. And unfortunately, it can lead to things not only like it follows you through your career, it follows you possibly through college admission. It follows you in ways that it can not only ruin your reputation, but lead to like bullying. Yeah. And I know bullying's been around forever. I've had that conversation before because I deal with cyberbullying. Bullying's been around. We used to call people names. I've been called names There might even been pushing or knocking over a tray at the lunch line. But the reality is, I heard a police officer once describe what's going on today with the digital technology when it comes to bullying. He says, imagine living in a world that nobody ever sleeps because technology never turns off. It never sleeps, and there's no enforcement of any rules and regulations. Yeah. So I can say whatever I want to say about anybody. That's what he was saying. And if you're on the power side of that, that gives you great power.
Sure.
But if you're on the receiving side of that,
nightmare, living
it's
nightmare.
A nightmare. Yeah. And that's why at times we'll get kids who will broadcast their suicides online. Or we'll go online and do things because they're trying to express their hurt in ways that you and I never had to deal with growing up.
I heard somebody put it this way, and it's always stuck out to me. And, imagine a 12-year-old girl who is at school. She's carrying her books, and she does something that every kid has done. She trips going up some steps, and it's so embarrassing. It ruins the rest of her day. She is just so completely flabbergasted by that, because people were laughing at her.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just such an embarrassment. Well, in our time, that ends the next day, maybe a couple days, but then it gets buried and it's long forgotten and you don't ever think of it. In today's world, that 12-year-old girl gets to see that over and over again because somebody had their cell phone out and recorded it. And anytime that they have something against her, they'll post that back online so everybody sees it. Or maybe an anniversary, this is what happened a year ago. It gets reposted again. And that 12-year-old girl can never get past that because it keeps resurfacing again and again and again. And then, parents are telling their kids, you just need to suck it up. It's not a big deal, and don't understand the ramifications. And we wonder why kids today are so anxious, that anxiety levels have increased. And that is part of what you're talking about.
They can never escape it.
They can't.
That's the hard part.
So talking about parents a little bit, I read this in your book, and I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was just very, very insightful. So you're talking about parents' involvement. And according to a study published by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average hours parents spend in caring for children and helping with household is extremely low. And this goes into just like your daily interaction with your kids, like when everybody's back home at the end of the day, how much time you're spending with your kids. Because the typical scene, everybody gets home and everybody goes in their own separate rooms and is on a screen. And so this speaks to that. So 1 hour, 24 minutes per day in caring for and helping children, 32 minutes a day per day in the physical care of the children, 2.4 minutes per day reading to or with their children, 18.6 minutes per day in playing with their children, not counting sports, 5.4 minutes per day in activities related to household, children's educational activities. And then you go on to say, don't miss the decimal in those numbers. So it's 5.4 minutes, 18.6 minutes. And this is minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is like
out of a 24-hour day.
Out of a 24-hour day. And so we're wondering, why are our kids going rogue? Well, it's because we're not, based on your research, we're not spending any time with our kids. We're leaving them to the world's upbringing, which we all know what the world is. It's being presented to them on the screen. So what?
Right, there's a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If parents who by God's design are supposed to be the number one influence,
right,
in the lives of their children, if parents aren't doing that, there's a vacuum.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, if you don't do this, somebody else will.
Yeah.
Please do not mistaken that it will just not be done.
Right.
Somebody is gladly waiting to step into your position as parents. And so the reality is our homes, man, you're talking about a culture now.
Yeah.
You've stepped outside of just specifically technology, and you've gone into a cultural approach to the American family.
Yep.
And that cultural approach to the American family has been described as a NASCAR pit stop. That's probably one of the best illustrations that I have seen. And as I travel the country, sometimes that fits better than others. So in bigger cities, it seems to fit better than small town America, right? But the NASCAR pit stop model basically says whoever spends the most time in the pits loses the race. And the pit is the home. That's where you come back to get your tires changed, fuel in your tank, you get the windshield cleaned off. If you need a refill on your water bladder or whatever it is, right? If you're the driver in that car,
yeah,
you've got people who are there to help put you out on the track. And the goal is to spend the least amount of time at home as possible. And here's the deal. I don't want to paint too broadly, right, with too broad of a brush. But the reality is, if we're going to sleep 8 hours a day, which very few people get 8 hours of sleep, but let's say we do, right? 8 hours a day. An adult's going to go to work for 8 hours a day. In a bigger city, they may have to commute 1 hour one way, 1 hour home. So that's 10 hours now in their workday. That's 18 hours out of a 24-hour day.
Yeah.
Now, you can look at that and say, well, Joe, what are we supposed to do? That only leaves, 6 hours, right? 6 hours. What am I supposed to do? Because I'm tired.
Right.
I've got chores that have to be done. Maybe, the kids have extracurricular activities, which oftentimes happens. Not like when you get home from work, the kids are just sitting there going, oh, Dad or Mom, we're so glad you're home. Now let's do nothing but just talk for the rest of the night.
Right.
No, they've got homework. They've got chores. We call that life, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, if we let life just happen, then we're going to wake up one day and we're going to be those statistics.
Yep.
You said something earlier in this interview, in this podcast. You used a word that I love. You said intentional. Mm-hmm. I use intentional, deliberate, and purpose, right? And those words are crucial to the culture of our home. Yeah. If we're just responding based upon whatever life throws at us, that wouldn't surprise me that those numbers get so low.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, even if you had the time, parents get home and unplug. A dad who's worked hard all day, a mom who's worked hard all day, because most homes don't have a mother who stays home anymore, right? They're two incomes, which is double the stress load. Then that means who's going to do what at home, right? Where in generations gone by, the role differentiations were pretty defined. After World War II, those began to change, if you look back culturally speaking. But today, that's not where we are. So the deal is, you get home, now who's going to cook, who's going to clean, who's going to go grocery shopping? When's all that supposed to happen? Much less pick the kids up, take them here, and do this, that. Before too long, you sit down at night, and what you do is you turn the TV on, everybody gets their phones out, and while you're watching TV, everybody's on their phones. Yeah. There's very little interaction unless it's intentional, purposed, and deliberate. Yeah. And so when I start talking about the family that is parenting faithfully, the family that is trying to not say everything in technology is bad. I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy who says it's all bad. I mean, you and I are loaded down with technology here. Yeah. So we got to be careful of being a hypocrite, right? And saying all that. So, there's some great things about it. But we are not going to bury our head in the sand and say, well, because there are some great things about it, all things are great about it. Right. No, we're going to, and neither we're going to go the other way, because there are some bad things, all things are bad. No. That's not what we're doing. But what we are doing is this: if you're not intentional, deliberate, and purpose in your family culture, then you will end up being a statistic. Yeah. And I have dealt with parents who did not know why their kids didn't want to do anything with the youth programs that I was a part of. Same parents whose kids grew up and weren't faithful later on in life. And the idea is they don't understand it, because on Sunday they took them to the church building. Mm-hmm. They were there 2 hours on Sunday morning, 1 hour Sunday night if you had a Sunday night service, and 1 hour on Wednesday night. I even throw in an extra hour of youth activity, right? Mm-hmm. So in a given week, you might get 3 on Sunday, 1 on Wednesday, and another. You get 5 hours of what I call God time. Yeah. But you'll never offset this culture and what Satan's doing in and through this culture if you only get 5 hours of what we call God time. And all of that's not intentional, plugged in. I mean, you and I have seen kids who show up, but they would rather be anywhere else but the church building. Yeah. So the reality is, at home, man, we've got to be deliberate with that. So the deal is, what are you going to do on Monday night to be deliberate? Yeah, you're tired, but what are you going to do? Yeah. Well, the kids have this practice and they have that practice. Okay, I'm not asking you what all the extra activities you're plugged in. Is it possible you're plugged into too many extracurricular activities, right? Mm-hmm. The overschedule bit, the idea of, hey, our kids deserve this. No. Nowhere in the Bible does it say your kids need to play every sport that's out there and make sure every single hour of their day is scheduled. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I would offer to you that's not a benefit to that kid, right? But the idea is this: what are you going to do to be intentional on Monday? What are you going to be intentional on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Because that plays into this. When we don't even eat meals at the table anymore as a whole, that should tell you a lot about the American home. When we have individuals who do not prioritize the home because they're prioritizing other things. And you got me going now, brother. Yeah. Because here's the reality. We say we have to have 2 income families. The reality is maybe we don't need to have 2 brand new trucks or vehicles. Maybe we don't need to eat out as much as we eat out. Right. Maybe we don't need to have all the brand new technology. Maybe we don't need to have all the streaming services that we feel like we have to pay for. Maybe we don't have to live at the level that we're living at. Because quite honestly, man, what I'm seeing is a devaluing of the home in the sense that we don't prioritize it as like we used to, and a valuing of other things. Yeah. And we shouldn't be surprised when our kids mimic that as they grow up.
So yeah, we're teaching it. We talk so much about the kids and their being peer pressure, but adults, we have this kind of FOMO too, and we want the best of the best and the newest and all of that. And so we have completely altered. I've talked a lot about just with other people in my own book about the table. And it was one of the things that I had growing up that was ingrained, that that was sacred. That was sacred time. As busy as we were, and me and my brother and my sister were just as involved in sports and activities and drama and theater and everything else that you could imagine as any kid is today, maybe even more so. But I had modeled for me a mom and a dad who valued the table. We're coming together as a family. We're going to be talking about what's really important in life. 99.9% of the time that involves some type of religious, spirituality kind of based thing, shuttling us to and back and forth and all the different things we're involved in. Mom or dad or both would use that opportunity in the car to talk about, guess what? Spirituality, Jesus. Who is Jesus to you? Let's talk about. So yeah, we were busy, but they were very intentional and deliberate about how they spent, and rather than having all these categories of things that we're doing, where this is priority number 1, priority number 2, priority number 3, and if Jesus and God and religion is priority number 1, well, that priority can bump down to priority number 3 because 2, 4, 5, and 6 all of a sudden jump back up because they're the pressing thing. What they did was completely re-envision priorities, and so all of the worldly stuff, and a lot of it was good stuff, stayed the priorities, but what they took was a big circle of value, and all those priorities went in that value, and that circle of value
encompassed all of
was Jesus Christ.
Right.
So we're going to fit everything about life, all the mundane stuff, even unrelated church stuff is still going to somehow fit into that value of Jesus Christ. And so they provided a fantastic model for me, and I've been able to utilize that. And as I was reading your book, I'm like,
that's what you said.
This is what Mom and Dad did.
Yeah.
This is great. This is just, yeah.
Well, and what you're saying, the part you were reading from, I believe it was from the leadership component of it, was, in John chapter 10, the sheep followed the good shepherd. And Jesus would mention numerous times the reason they didn't follow that other guy because they didn't know his voice.
Yeah.
But they followed the good shepherd because they knew his voice. Right. And my argument is, and I believe with everything that I am, our kids have a lot of voices that are vying for their attention.
Yep.
If I am not intentional, deliberate, and purposed and available as their father, and Aaron is not as their mother, then the sheep hear the voice of the one who they spend the most time with. And if I am allowing my children to spend not just on doing bad things, I think that's where the misnomer is with technology. They're looking at bad. No. If they spend more time around the voices on social media, the voices on whatever games they're playing, whatever YouTubers they're watching, why would I think that they would follow my voice?
Sure.
When that's the voice who's spending the most time with them.
Man, that's a sobering thought.
It is scary.
Yeah.
That's why I go back to intentional, deliberate purpose. What are you going to do on Monday to be intentional?
Yeah.
It may look like getting out and throwing the ball. But the deal is, what did you do today to spend any time with your son or daughter, connecting with them, but also, as you said, making sure whatever happened in their day is processed in that bubble of value.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not going to happen just because you take them to church.
Yeah. Great. Man, I hate that we're out of time. I had 12 questions. I think we covered 2.
Man, they're just going to have to get the book, brother.
I know.
Or do this again.
Well, listen, that's where I was going. If you are a parent or not a parent, everybody needs to read this book, Connected: Parenting Faithfully in the Digital Age by Joe Wells. I think we've got a graphic that Parker is going to pull up. If it doesn't, if you're watching this on our YouTube and it doesn't pull up, just go to I think it's kaiopublications.org.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, and that is let me think, KAIO.
Publications
is how you is how you spell the Kaio, and all of Joe's books. You've written numerous books. I've got another one here, also a great book called Complete. Put that up in the camera right there. Wait, turn it that way. There we go. That's also a great book. You've 5, 6 books, 7. How many books?
I have to go back and count, brother. I've been blessed that for whatever reason I never saw myself as a writer, but I write because I was told once that what I write will outlive me.
Yeah.
And
Once
to
it's
me,
down on paper.
it's about an influence that'll continue for time after I'm dead.
Yeah, that's cool. So we always like to close out the show with a scripture reading. I'm going to have you do that in just a second. Before we get to that, let me just do a couple shout outs. First of all, Ministry League is one of our sponsors. We greatly appreciate them. You can see their QR code there on the screen. You can download that app. I highly recommend it. It's a great resource for ministers, for parents also. Also, we have another podcast that we broadcast out of this studio every Monday called After Sunday, Digging Deeper. That's a great 15-minute recap of our Sunday morning lessons. They do a great job in simplifying a boring sermon that I give, and then they make that very interesting. So I listen to that, and just every Monday morning I think to myself, I should have said that. So if there was a way to listen to their recap before I did the lesson, that would be the way to go about it. All right. Also, just a plug for next Wednesday night, we've got Lonnie Jones coming in to be our speaker on Awaken Chattanooga. If you don't have anything to do on a Wednesday night, come to 400 Vine Street here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as we do our Awaken Chattanooga conference. Lonnie Jones is a great speaker. We're looking forward to having you tonight speak to us. Can't wait to hear you. And join us next Wednesday as we continue this. Don't know if I'm going to have Lonnie on the podcast or not. We're hoping to get him here. So that's all the announcements I can think of to say. If you're watching on YouTube, become our 4th listener. Click that subscribe button and share it. If you've got questions or comments about our show, our content, email us at thelionthewayandthewar@gmail.com, and we'll get back with you. We're very responsive. All right. If you don't mind, Joe, go ahead and close us out with a word from God.
Absolutely. It comes from Hebrews chapter 11, and it's become one of the favorites that I have that serves kind of as a motto for us and our family. Verse 13, dealing with those in faith, all these died in faith without receiving the promise, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they're seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they had went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But here it is in verse 16. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. That's become so significant because I want the same to be said for my family, that God is not ashamed to be called our God.
Awesome. Great thoughts. Until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, be kind to one another, love one another. Remember, the creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave up his only son for you. Have a blessed day.